and it's recording. Also, I'm going to pause recording. So funny, I live in an older house and now my heat's kicking in, so you could hear all the
You know, it's funny you say that. I just heard my heater do the same thing.
like, oh, now you start.
Yeah, 50-50 shot before this is over. You'll hear mine start clanging at some point.
We'll get started. It is 7:02. Yeah, we'll get started. I want to welcome everyone to our second community conversation with BLM. These are opportunities that we're trying to have monthly to really just bring the conversation back to the forefront. We are trying to take the conversation to not where we have been over the past couple of years, but really kind of moving forward to solutions, to looking at some positivity, to discuss what's happening now in the world and how we're feeling about it, and how we're all coming together to really move forward in times like this that we know are just crazy. I'm just going to leave it at crazy times right now, stressful times, and all of that. I will say, just as introductions, we did lose two of our panelists tonight, so it will be an intimate conversation between the three of us. Hopefully, we do have a third panelist coming on soon. If she makes it, who knows at college life, what's that, what that looks like. But I'm going to allow our panelists to introduce themselves, and I'll start with Angela.
Hi, folks. Great to be here tonight. And Tanisha, thanks so much for having me. My name's Angela. I am a social worker in Lebanon, New Hampshire, who's like accidentally falling into community organizing, I guess. I'm here today in my capacity as a co-chair for UV-EAR, which stands for Upper Valley Equity and Anti-Racism. We're an organization of BIPOC leaders in the New Hampshire, Vermont area of this border area that's like kind of weird, and I think the exact term is micropolitan, which I think is hilarious. It's a micropolitan area. There are some places that would some people might consider us pretty rural, and I think other people in our region who would consider us very not rural. Anyway, so we're on this area, the Vermont New Hampshire border, up in the Connecticut River, and as an organization, we've been here for 3 years, actually going on 4 years now, to be a presence for BIPOC community in this area. So that's who I'm representing today.
Thank you. Go ahead, Reverend Heidi.
Hi, friends. It's nice to be with you. I'm Heidi Carrington Heath, and I use she, her pronouns. And I'm here tonight wearing a couple of different hats. I'm here as the executive director of New Hampshire, formerly Seacoast Outright. We're the state's oldest LGBTQ plus organization, and we focus on youth and families across the state. And I'm here arguably even more as a resident of Exeter, New Hampshire, here on the Seacoast, and a local community organizer an activist who's worked to try to have conversations here in our small town across lines of difference for a long time. And so glad to be here kind of holding both of those buckets, and especially in conversation with Angela and Tanisha, who are just doing such incredible work in different ways.
Thank you. So tonight's conversation is really focusing on how do we address systemic racism, all the isms, right, in a predominantly white cisgender community. We are talking about how do we amplify voices in these small towns and these rural towns and the northern side, all those different locations, and then how do we build allyship across all of it. So we're going to start off with some challenges and then work our way to some happiness, right? So there's been a lot going on. I know I've lived here for 5-6 years now and have experienced the range of racism, sexism, all the things, right? But what kind of challenges have you all seen or encountered really when it comes to the isms and living in this predominantly kind of white cisgender area? And I know it's a lot of people that won't believe it or think it's not true. And we sometimes we even preach to the choir, but I appreciate the vulnerability and everything we share tonight. But folks really need to understand, what we go through that really don't say. So I'll let you answer, anyone.
I'm happy to jump in. So I think one of the biggest challenges, especially being in a rural area or rural-ish, depending on your definition, is just the perception that BIPOC are not here at all. I think that there is a perception, of New Hampshire and New England as a whole that like, oh, these are like, very white states, which is certainly true compared to other areas. Um, but it doesn't mean that we don't exist or that we're not here at all. And so I find myself having to constantly in conversations be like, no, there is a BIPOC community here. There is more diversity than you think. So the city that I live in, Lebanon, in recent years is actually 85% white and 15% not white, which I actually think is like pretty different from what other people like consider or think is the perception of, I think most people think like, oh, like New Hampshire is 99.9% white, and that's not true. And the demographics of the state are changing to reflect that. So like diversity across the entire state, including the rural counties, has been rapidly increasing, especially in the last like, 10 years. So, but I find myself always in these conversations saying like, no, we're here. And it's almost like if you're not looking for diversity, you won't see it. One other quirk of my region is that we are next to, or, we have a Dartmouth College and also Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center in our area. And of course, Dartmouth Health has expanded across the whole state. But as a result, there's also a perception that's like, oh, the POC in that area, they're all really wealthy. Like they're here for the college, they're here for the hospital. So like they're fine. Like they're doing great. And it's like there's lots of folks who are not affiliated with either of them, either of these institutions. And and they don't benefit from the support of those institutions. So how do we make sure that we are, yes, it is true that there might be more like higher educated, higher income BIPOC in this area, but also we need to be making sure that we're not forgetting that there's lots of other folks who are not fitting in that demographic or that perception. So those are like two big misconceptions that we face in this region, but I think is also true in other rural areas in New Hampshire. So, Reverend Heidi?
Yeah, I'm going to tag team you there and say, especially in a community like Exeter, one of the real challenges, particularly around doing anti-racism work here, is the refrain, we don't have that here. This is a community that prides itself on being very learned and studied. We have a boarding school in town that really shapes the town culture in particular ways too. And so folks here really, especially before we started to engage these conversations more deeply, we don't have that here. That doesn't happen here. And so resultingly, a lot of thinking we were further along as a community than we really, really were and really are in our own journey to be more anti-racist, particularly in groups of white folks who are trying to do this work and be better allies. And I think that also sometimes results in a challenge of translating learning into action. It's great to learn. Learning's really important. It's a piece of the work for all of us all the time. And that work is less helpful when it doesn't then translate into some kind of tangible action. And so that's really been, I've seen some growth there over time, but that's really, really been a refrain here in the community that we've often run up against in doing this work.
So a couple of things I just heard. One is that folks really don't think when you have BIPOC individuals that are of a higher class, right, or of a higher social economic status, it doesn't happen here and all of that in this, we don't need to talk about it because it doesn't happen here. And our folks, the folks that are here, aren't those folks. Like, how do you really have those conversations and then respond back to really talk about, no, we still need to address systemic, all of the isms, right? And we still need to create change when folks don't believe that it's worth it here. Like, how do you do that? Just go. Y'all are being polite. Just talk.
I think an example that rises to mind for me that hits at this, Tanisha, is when we were moving through, the summer of 2020 and uprising, particularly in the wake of the murder of George Floyd here in the community. And we were starting to hear students at Phillips Exeter in particular lift their voices and tell their stories. Here is what has happened to me in this community. And I was really aware that in most rooms, folks would hear my voice differently as a white queer woman. So I could lift up, here is a queerphobic thing that has happened to me in this town, and folks would believe it. But watching my students tell their stories, and folks couldn't hear them in the same way, and really naming that out loud and saying, like, listen, y'all, I'm watching this play out in real time in these conversations, and you hear me differently, and I need you to hear them in the same way that you hear me.
Mm.
I think it becomes really hard to say, like, this is a systemic problem that we need you to pay attention to when there hasn't been, like, in our region, like a solid group that can, like, kind of stand for the BIPOC community, which of course, like, the BIPOC community is not a monolith, but and I think what's been challenging too is that, like, when we lose people, people leave the region because they're like, oh, Upper Valley is so white, like, I don't want to live here anymore. And then it becomes like almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think what's really challenging is, like, when predominantly white institutions say, oh, there's no diversity in this area, so it's not worth really trying. Oh, we got one person, but then they left, so they just can't stay. And it's not our fault. It's just the area. It's too white. And so I think that's this is not solutions focused, this is all just challenges, but, like, then it just becomes this, like, self-fulfilling prophecy. And, like, I can, like, literally my group, UV ear, was founded because we were just sort of like, I remember one of our opening conversations was, we just love for the people that we really like and care about to stop leaving this area. Like, this is a beautiful place that has a lot going for it. It's lovely. It's got lots of recreation. It's, like, peaceful. It's quiet. All the things that you love and want in a rural area. But then people are just like, I just, cannot find community here, or have these really negative experiences in predominantly white institutions, and then they have to leave, which is just heartbreaking every time it happens. So, a huge part of our effort as EVER is, like, standing up a group to be like, nope, there is a community here. There is a BIPOC community, and we are trying to elevate us so that we can, first and foremost, combat the perception that BIPOC aren't here.
I think that this current administration has changed things, right? Um, there's been a lot of executive orders. There's been a lot of word and language usage that are terrorizing folks, that are bringing out fear. And from the flip side, it has caused Black women to want to take a rest. It has, I will say, I've been reading up on a lot of things and a lot of posts on social media where Black women are like, listen, we fought this battle. We tried to do, to make change. We've been telling y'all all these things for how long that this stuff is going to happen, right? And no one listened. And now the answer is Black women are like, we're taking a break. Y'all can take up the mantle and do what needs to be done. So I say that, and then I ask, how do you take up the mantle? Like, how do you encourage self-reflection? How do you promote that accountability amongst others? Like, I find myself now wanting, I'm like, no, this is not in the third, because, Tanisha doesn't take a rest. But like, there are moments where I'm like, just Google it, chat GPT it, something like that, right? But I'm finding it harder to not be angry with the conversation, but to encourage that self-reflection. I find that you all are doing that better, in a different way. So how do you do that?
Oh, I think we had our work cut out for us before January 20th, and now it's like, and that work can't stop, but also there's a whole new pile of work on top of that that's in many ways more urgent. So it's both like, oh man, wish we could take a rest, and also now is the moment where I think our group is really interested in, like, hey, organizations that have promised to commit to DEI, what are you actually willing to do? Like, rubber hitting the road now. What can you commit to? And like, also understandable that there are some organizations, I know people are going to differ with me on this, in some places. Some organizations are like, we cannot publicly say DEI for a variety of reasons, in order to meet our original mission, but like having an existing relationship and an existing trust, so that like, even if they cannot blast it on their website or put it like on social media, that we as a leadership team can approach them and say, like, okay, even if you can't do this publicly, what are you willing to do privately? How are you going to hold up to your commitments? So I think right now we're really trying to lean on, like, who are the folks who have been calling themselves white allies, who have made promises and commitments, and how can we talk about that? And in some ways, maybe we have to disseminate that information differently than we used to, right? Like, maybe we can't be blasting on social media either for a variety of reasons, but can we like have these trust-based relationships and communicate differently? So I don't know. It's only what, 29 days in, still figuring this out.
Yeah, I feel that deeply in this area too. We two things feel really true to me. There is a whole new set of things that has arrived to us on January 20th that require us to think differently, act differently. Just what you said there really rang true for me, Angela. And it is also true, especially when working with groups of white folks who are new to this work. Somebody's been dying this whole time. Somebody's been getting deported this whole time. So there are pieces of this that are new, and there are pieces of this that are not new, because people have been hurting this whole time. And so starting to see folks who are really waking up to the crisis moment that we are in, and really wanting to harness that energy and also plug them into pockets of places the work has already been happening, both to lift some burden from others who can't carry that work in the same way that they could, because folks are too at risk, the danger is too high, they're too tired, they've been too harmed, whatever the case may be. So taking that good energy and also saying yes, and Don't reinvent the wheel. Here are some places to plug into that work. And similarly, I would say running an LGBTQ plus organization, as we think about things like sponsorship for Pride, for example, having some of those same conversations about, okay, your national organization may be pulling back on these commitments, but we know you, local branch of this org, to be a good ally to our community or invested in the work of equity and inclusion. So how can we count on you in this moment? How can we count on you and help you to live out those commitments in different ways?
Do you think there's a little bit of shame within organizations and people, because there's this funding attachment to it, right? And we're all scared to lose the money. Should we be ashamed to feel that way, that we're willing to just push it to the side for the money to keep the movement going, because maybe in philosophy or practice we're still doing it, but language on paper we're not? Or is this what we should be doing, is catering to this so that we can keep the movement going? Like, I am very much torn on what's the line that we fight on and what's the line that we need the money for. You know what I mean? Like, what's the balance? I don't know. No.
I, I've been thinking about this question a lot, and, as somebody who worked in nonprofits for pretty much my entire professional career, like, I believe in nonprofits, and I think they're important, and also have a lot of work to do and exist in a broken system, et cetera, et cetera. But increasingly, I am like, okay, maybe I'm being paranoid, but I'm increasingly drawn to, like, what is mutual aid going to be able to do? What are the things that, like, formal institutions will not be able to do for us anymore? And I think it's going to be a balance, right, between, there are some organizations that are going to have that conversation, like Reverend Heidi was saying, but, like, quietly, like, yes, maybe we can't publicly say this, but, like, we, the local branch, we are still in it, right? So maybe there's some things that, like, some formal institutions can continue to do, but also, like, laws may change, and, like, in ways that I hope they don't, but there might be laws changing in ways that make it so that, like, people can't access the normal institution. So then mutual aid is going to have to step up. So I think, like, where formal institutions can have money and share it in ways with the not formal organizations might end up being critical there. And just being real, like, I do think there are some organizations that are like, we don't have to do DEI anymore. Whew. Like, thank goodness we didn't, like, we had to do that for a grant or whatever, but we don't have to anymore. So yay. And I think part of, like, a lot of my conversations right now is sussing out, like, who are the people who are like, we are still in this and you can count on us, versus, like, all right, like, you were a fair weather friend. Just to, I don't know, that's just sort of where my mind is going right now.
No, I'll just say I think you're right on the mutual aid question. I think how we build communities and support each other is going to look fundamentally different. And I really appreciated the point you lifted up about organizations who do have money flowing through. How do we redirect some of those resources right into the hands of the community? Because that's what has to happen right now.
What do you think about, there is this conversation happening on the philanthropy side? I'm totally going off script, guys. That there
I love
is
it.
this,
Improvising.
there's this donor fatigue now because of everything that is happening in our world that is blowing up, right? And the questions of where's the money going to come from? How are we going to get funding? The mutual aid question, right? Orgs are looking for dollars for mutual aid. Nonprofits who, like BLM or like New Hampshire Outright, that is doing this work that probably can no longer rely on federal funds, if we did at all. How do we talk to those donors? And I'm talking about those large individual donors, that are like, there's so many people asking me for money now. I am exhausted, which I don't even know what that means. Because to me, I'm like, does that mean like you're tired of like writing a check? Does it mean like you're tired of being asked the question? But like, really, like, and I know it's a thing, and I'm hearing it, and folks are like pulling back a little bit. Like, what do we say to that? Like, what's the response to that? I mean, I'm just trying to figure it out because it's just been a new conversation this week, but like, I'm trying to figure out how to respond, you know? I stumped y'all.
Well, so Heidi, I'll be really curious to know what you think. I haven't been an executive director, and I've had a little bit of involvement with philanthropy, but not as certainly as my like expertise or focus. But my understanding is that in the last several decades, I guess, a lot of development work has really been focused on how can we approach like the major donor. And I've heard some statistics about how like, it used to be like 80% of your funding came from the top, from 20% of donors, and now it's becoming more like 90 to 95% of your funding is coming from like 5% of your donors, right? So like, it seems like philanthropy over time has really honed in on like how can we just get to the wealthiest people and ask them, which like I can totally imagine that those wealthy donors are facing a lot of fatigue. Again, this is all speculation on my part. But on the other hand, I was just in a community meeting yesterday. It was like brand new. It was just a group of people who were like, we don't think what's happening is okay. We're just going to like assemble in a space and we're going to talk. And, I bet that many of those folks would be like, I can't give you $10,000, but I would be willing to give you, $100, $200. And so I think it might be, back to this like mutual aid thing, like how can we think about philanthropy differently? This is again all speculation coming from a non-expert. Like Heidi, I'm super curious to know what you think.
Do not sell yourself short. You are absolutely an expert in your own arena, and that I think you are right on there. Yes, I would agree. I think we are certainly seeing in our sphere, and I'm hearing from colleagues at other organizations, new folks who are showing up to the work and really invested, excited, want to help, um, scared about the moment, but think like, okay, I know this is a cause I care about. And those aren't folks, generally speaking, who are going to write us a huge check right out of the gate. But for organizations like BLM New Hampshire, for organizations like New Hampshire Outright, those small donations go straight to work. They really do. We flip them right around into programs for the kids or mutual aid or what, whatever the thing is that we're working on. And yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think that is going to fundamentally change the game in terms of how we think about fundraising, how we think about organizational sustainability. Do I know what 6 months from now is going to look like in that arena? Not totally yet. I have for a different chat, I have multiple thoughts on where I think we'll probably be in the grant landscape and some other things about a year from now. But I think you're right on.
So there are kids right now, our youth, college students, so I'll give it from middle school, elementary school, all the way up to college that are scared right now, whether it's about funding they'll get, grants they will get, scholarships they will get, whether it's about on college campuses, the affinity spaces that are created, affinity housing that's created, student unions that are created, and then down to elementary and middle school where it has been pushed to be open, to be out, and I'll say push to an extent, not fully, but there has been safe spaces in elementary and middle school and high school, right? Folks were moving on to the gender neutral bathrooms. They were moving on to acceptance and all the things. And now it's almost like that stuff is paused and we've taken maybe 10 step backwards, right? Like, how do we now talk to our youth and our teens and our college students to say, you still have a voice, like share your voice in a world that is really promoting fear?
I think in our arena, we work with kids from kindergarten through young adult aged, and I want them to know that there has never been a world where queer and trans people have not existed, and there will never be a world where we do not exist. And this moment is hard. It is really scary. And their voices have never mattered more. How we might work with them to use their voices does look different in this moment. So, example, in New Hampshire, I'm not necessarily going to encourage a young trans kid to go testify at the state house right now. Given the makeup of our current legislator and the moment we're in and what that looks like, that's not necessarily a great use of their time or caring for them well. But would I love to help you tell your story and lift it up in an Instagram reel or something that we might use in a different way? Absolutely. And that narrative applies across a variety of populations. There has never been a world where Black women have not existed and will not exist, and so on and so on and so on. They try to erase us or try to silence us when they're afraid. And they're afraid because of our power.
My experience on this front is a little bit more limited, but I'm thinking about the class I'm teaching right now. So I also teach part-time at Plymouth State University and in the social work department, and I'm teaching a class called Social Welfare Policy, which is extremely interesting right now, very current. And I think I find a lot of like meaning and fulfillment and frankly also coping mechanism and like talking with young people about like, yeah, this is the world that we're in, but like how can we help you understand it better, and like understanding, from this like curriculum point of view, like here's how policy works, and also there are so many opportunities to engage and be a part of this, that like just like you were saying, Heidi, like your voice has never mattered more than right now, and like this is a moment in time that like the more that you understand how you can influence things and like what, how legislative process works, and especially like I think a lot about how yes, like the federal level is pretty compromised at the moment, to say the least, but then that means that all the power is local, and that like you can build local relationships, like you can call your local representative and like talk to them, you can meet them for coffee, like you can get to know them by name, and there's so much power in like the local level and in ways that you can influence, and like so, and it's just like thinking about like how all these historical policy decisions, like all the progress that we've made in the past have been contested at every level, at every moment. And there's just so many ways in which people made their voices heard, people had power. So it's like, yes, the president can do XYZ, but it's also like, it also depends on like what happens here. Your local zoning board, I will always say, is super influential, arguably more influential than your senator in your hometown, right? So I don't know. I think that's where I find a lot of hope. That's the message I'm telling my students.
So you touched on social media and the local work, right? Social media has become the tool to use for everything. Not maybe so much Facebook, because that's for the old folks, apparently. Instagram is creeping up for the old folks too, I think. But TikTok is in and out, and I don't know what else is out there, right? You got Blue Sky and all the different things. But like, how do we like navigate through all of that to use it for its actual power? Like, if I was the student who wanted to put out a reel, like, where do I even start? Like, what do I even say? Like, I mean, because we talk about it and we're like, just go on social media and find that person, right? Find the person that is, and we give all these lists of at so and so and so, and we tell them to follow them. But like, there's also the opposite side of that, pushing the opposite opinion, right? Or the opposite non-reality. Like, how do we use it? How do we even band together on social media? We always talk about physical coalitions and physical, allyship. But like, where's the allyship on social media too? I put like 4 questions in one, but y'all know what I'm saying. Like,
Okay, I'm like super biased as somebody who is not on Facebook. I am chronically a lurker on TikTok and Reddit, but like I don't post anything. So everything I say, please take with a grain of salt. But I think like there are many ways in which like I think social media and digital storytelling can be really powerful. So one of my fellow UBE members, he's been uh, he's been producing a podcast show in our community that's just like telling the story of what it's like to be BIPOC in this area, which I just think is like incredibly powerful. That's amazing. Um, and also simultaneously, I think that especially given our current climate, like face to face matters more than ever. And so I'm also like endeavoring, there are some ways in which like elevating, digital storytelling and social media is really important as like an attraction point, as like as a place for people to land. But like my hope is to like start meeting people face to face as much as I can. And build the in-person relationships. There's also the like other issue where as a social worker, I feel very acutely aware that like there are lots of communities in like my neck of the woods where like reliable internet is not the greatest, especially if you're not affluent, right? So it's like it really matters about getting out to people, and especially right now where there are groups that are like going full underground. Like I think the face to face, like the trust based relationship matters more. So I think like both are needed. It's not to say like no social media, even though I do have a slant towards like social media has kind of ruined us as a society. But also we need like we need that for visibility and for representation strategically. One thing I do think a lot about is like one of the messages I want to give to like say my students in my policy class is like social media is a form of action. It is not the only form of action. And I think we would be um, not very effective if all of our effort was online, right? Like how can we take other tangible action instead?
right, right.
Yeah, I totally agree with you about getting out into the local community. One of the things I've been saying to folks around me when they sort of say, I'm trying to build relationships locally, but I'm struggling a little bit. Find 3 or 4 people in your hyper local community you're willing to take a risk to reach out to and be awkward with, and get together, break some bread, have some coffee, and start talking. And those local face-to-face connections and relationships really are more crucial than they've ever been. It's a piece of how we care for each other right now. It's a piece of how we start to have the clunky conversations that we need to have. It is a piece too, I think, of how we support our youth and our young people right now. Like, okay, adult, go find one other adult and like have the hard conversation you've been avoiding about trans kids or about this issue. That's a piece of how we start to move the work. Angela, I really agree with you too, that I think social media is a tool in this moment that is good for particular things. It can't be the whole ball game. And I think we really leaned into it in some particular ways in recent years, some of which were helpful, some of which were less helpful. But the revolution will not happen on social media. It's a good place to share information. It can be a good place to get connected to others, but then take those relationships and take that work into real time.
So if orgs and groups are going underground and we are, you know, putting safety in our circles, we are coveting them, all the things, how do you then build allyship? Now, I'm not saying I'm against it, or, I think now is the time probably to go underground and build up a foundation and come back out, powerful and collective. But if we do that, though, we run the risk of isolation. We run the risk of oscillating, from others who want to build allyship. So then how do we truly then build allyship in this area that we know is predominantly white, predominantly cisgender? Like, how do we then come back together?
I think at this moment, we're seeing a lot of groups proliferate and like, which is amazing. There's like so much energy and like, this is not okay. We have to take action. And I think the challenge is to coordinate them, to bring them together. Like, I think, we have to be kind of aggressive social butterflies in terms of like bringing all these like circles together or like sharing information and like I mean I think we're all still figuring out how to do that like safely and securely. Certainly I think Signal has been a really valuable tool for that. For those of you who might not have heard, it's an app with end-to-end encrypted messaging. So theoretically I hope my friends who are really who are knowledgeable about cybersecurity say it's really good, and it is a safe place to go. Many community organizers are turning to this, so we're seeing like a lot of like activity on Signal right now, which is fabulous. And just people finding like, okay, like maybe this is a good way to share information more privately. But I think like, yeah, I think we can't like just hole up into our little circles. Now is actually the time, as you were saying, Heidi, to like branch out more and like create more networks. Like I keep on thinking of like fungi and like sending out like mycelium underground to like connect with each other or something like that. That's the image in my head. Okay.
Yes, I think in the organizational space too in New Hampshire, I'm as guilty of this as the next person. We can get very siloed from each other, or very right head down into our own work. And I'm here and this group is here and this organization is here. And this is Tanisha, you and I have batted this around a little bit too. Like this is the moment now more than ever that we need to be a collective movement and do the relationship work to build that collective movement. There is no time to waste in being siloed or I'm gonna say the quiet part out loud, which is looking at each other as each other's competition. Like that is not the world we live in. We are not each other's competition. We need to be arm in arm, lockstep with each other, and have each other's backs in this moment. So now is the time.
There's more than enough work to share all around.
What do you say to the person though that feels like they are doing the work and then maybe they're told they're being performative, right? And they're like, what do you mean I was being performative? I am doing the work. I am reading my books. I am having the talk with my friend. I am reposting, but I still am being told I'm performative. And this happens a lot with folks that I talk to. And I'm like, but you're not doing real allyship. You are behind the scenes or whatever that may mean in terms of performative, right? Your own subjective definition. What do you tell people? Like, how do you get out of performative to real allyship?
I think for me, one of the questions that I often ask people, because it's also a question I try to ask myself, is why am I doing this? Like, what is my motivation here? What am I doing this to like get the green check mark that says like you have checked the ally box? And if so, there's a deeper conversation to have there about is what you're doing really about showing up, about being a co-conspirator to the people who are looking to you to be in community with them, or is this about like, I want my points, I want my ally points? And listen, like we all can fall into those hurdles or trip or stumble. But when we've built some good community around us, there are also folks who will say, hey, like, here's the experience I'm having right now. Can we talk about this? And I also really believe deeply that ally or co-conspirator isn't a title that I bestow on me. It is something that folks I am in community with say, yes, you are trustworthy. You have been an ally to us, or you are a co-conspirator with us.
I have seen conversations, mainly on social media, with you, Reverend Heidi, that I was like, oh, that was an amazing way called someone in, right? And not a call out, but a call in, and not from a shaming point of view, but really an eye-opening and awareness point of view, and a non-judgmental point of view. Um, Walk me through how you kind of do that, because me, I'm like faces, emoji, all of that. Like, and then I'm like, oh, I should have said that. Let me go back and be nice. But how do you work through that? Through really kind of calling someone in to understand, because I think that's part of the problem that folks have with when we talk about allyship and co-conspirator and building those bridges and having those hard conversations. People don't know how to have those hard conversations. We shut down at the moment someone's like, but what about X, Y, and Z? Or what are you going to say about this, or the science of it all, or whatever it may be? Like, how do you do that?
I think for me, those conversations start with the relationship. So they start with who is the person in front of me, and how do I approach this in a way, with all the things I know about that person. If there's one thing I know for sure, it is that shame is not going to help us get closer to authentic community. But community at its best both lifts each other up and also calls each other in. And so really just trying to think about who is this person in front of me? What is the conversation we might be able to have right now that can help move this needle? And there's enough trust here for me to be like, hey, here's how I'm experiencing what you're saying right now. Can we talk about this? I think a lot about the checklists of white supremacy culture characteristics. And perfectionism is a big piece of that list. It is, and so it is not a thing that I try to expect in my relationships. We're all going to stumble, we're all going to get it wrong. I do a lot. And I count on the people around me to call me in if that happens and I don't see it. And similarly, I think accountability is a real act of love. You have to love someone and care about them enough to say, hey, like, this is not okay. Or this is the ouch that I'm having in this moment. Let's talk about it. We don't do that with people that we're not invested with and that we don't care about. And so for me, it starts with the relationship and it goes from there.
Mm.
Like, Tanisha, back to your first question about like how do we distinguish the performative allyship? And I think that for better or worse, actually definitely for worse, um, the brownie points that you get for being an ally are gone. Like the institutional incentives for, an organization to fake, allyship and commitment to DEI, like, it being a box to check. Well, that box isn't there anymore. And so I think and then also people are being emboldened, right? So I'm not saying I'm happy about this, but like it is also like, okay, for better or worse, you know, all that's left is, here's the work, and it's not going to be extremely rewarding necessarily in the same way it used to be. And I think as we go on, I expect that what we're going to ask from our allies is going to be increasingly tangible, and like material. And, I think in the last 4 years, I can't tell you how many like DEI committees I've been on sort of devolved into like book clubs, or like, can I how am I interrogating my own thoughts, and which is important. The self-reflection is definitely important, but this is not the time to read books, right? I mean, it was never the time to just read books, but like more than ever, I think there's no incentive to perform. And actually just a lot of risk, as we were seeing. And I think in many ways, like the true allies are really shown who they are right now.
Mm-hmm. I remember I said to someone the other day, put down the book and look at what's literally in front of you. Like at a certain point, the books all say the same thing if you're reading the right ones, but they do all get you to the same endpoint. So look at what's right in front of you and what are you doing about it? And that really is the key. I want to leave us with one last question with you all in your specific organizations. How are you working hard right now? I know you have a lot going on. What are you doing? What are you doing out here in this community? How are you pushing the envelope? How are you stirring up the trouble?
New Hampshire outright, I'll sort of say, I mean, how are we not stirring up the trouble? We are, we're creating spaces for connection and community and joy for queer and trans youth right now, which feels more subversive than maybe it ever has. And we are working to train and educate folks all over the state about how to be good allies and how to show up for the needs of our kids and our families right now. We're heading to the State House tomorrow alongside a number of our partners to be visible and to stand particularly with trans youth. And some of us will stay to be present for the committee hearing on a particular priority bill. We're trying to redirect some resources to mutual aid right now. And so to meet material needs in the community, particularly for things that may now be harder to access or for kiddos who really need some additional support in that way. And having conversations like this one with amazing folks like both of you.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like, man, it's only been 29 days. Feels like it's been like 4 years. But, I think we had to pivot really hard to be like, both we were doing work before that's important and necessary. Um, one of the things that we had been doing prior to getting ready to do this was hosting these BIPOC congresses in our area to bring groups together to say like, hey, what are you working on? Like, what are you working on? We were just like in our rural-ish area, like we were not connected to a lot of the other work. So like that kind of connection, we plan to continue it, and it's more important now than ever. And also we are trying as much as we can, like how can we learn like what are the biggest safety concerns right now for for our BIPOC community, in trying to, again, going back to this, like, our formal institutions, like our nonprofits, our healthcare system, to talk to them about like, you know, they can't necessarily reach the people who are most impacted, but we can. And we have those relationships. And like, how can we bring that in a safe and de-identified way to the attention of our formal organizations to say, like, what can you do to be protecting our safety? How can you be responding to those concerns? So it kind of feels like, our group has always been hardcore networking and bringing people together and building community. And so in many ways that's continued, but with a, I mean, like the tone of it is different, right? And the urgency is definitely higher than it was before, but it was it was high, during the last presidential administration too. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's both keep on keeping on and also like, and let's get to it, and we need all the allies that we can get. Like how can we be bringing together more allies? I think now is not the time to be demanding perfection, like you were saying, Heidi. Like it's about like, there's plenty of work to do. Let's figure out where to put that energy.
I'm gonna add to that and say, just to answer my own question, um, we as BLM New Hampshire, again, are seeing a high need for mutual aid as well. and not a lot of funds to provide it. And so we are really in the urgent need of fundraising right now. We still are pushing our programs. We have maternal health initiative where we're bringing awareness and education to that area as well. Um, and then we're doing these conversations monthly with a different topic, different guest every month, and a different host every month, to really bring out the different voices and perspectives that are doing this work and doing it amazingly and collaboratively. So I appreciate you too. I appreciate you chatting with me and us. I appreciate all those who took time out of their Tuesday night and chilled with us and hung with us. I hope you learned. Hope you got a little nugget from this and move forward. Please follow us on social media. Please follow everyone on here on social media and their organizations. Become a monthly donor, become a donor, period. Sign up for newsletters, all the things. We have an event on Friday at 3S Art Space. It's a dance party night. So if you feel like a little bit of happiness in the time of despair, come on out, 7 to 9 in Portsmouth. Thank you all and see you next month.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks y'all for being here today, and huge thank you to Tanisha and BLM New Hampshire for inviting us. This was lots of fun.